My dearest child, before the light found its way to Theodore, it first had to pass through every storm inside him. This is not just a story about a man in a lighthouse. It's about you, about learning that peace does not arrive when the noise ends, but when your heart finally learns to listen. If stories like this calm your spirit and remind you that gentle strength still matters, please like this video, subscribe, and let this light reach someone who needs it tonight. My dearest child, hush the room for a moment and listen. The kettle clicks like a small bird in your kitchen, brave enough to sing before sunrise. You stand still, palms on the counter, the linoleum cool under your feet. Outside, the coast exhales. Fog loosens its grip on the ridgeline and slides like silk toward the harbor. The town of Lumenhaven is not yet awake. Even the gulls bargain for 5 more minutes of dark. You were going to write the letter last night, another letter, another tidy exit dressed up as discernment. But something told you to wait, not from fear, but because endings feel different when morning light is in the room. You are not afraid of the truth. You are afraid of quitting early. That, you admit, is a noble kind of fear. The radio on the sill is old. It collects dust like a hobby. You twist the dial for weather and get a soft rush of static. You always do. Except today the static thins, as if a careful hand spreads it apart and a sentence slides through. This is not coincidence. You laugh, because what else do you do when the air decides to have good timing? Okay, you say to no one in particular, message received, as if the empty kitchen needs reassurance that you are, in fact, still you. The kettle chirps. You pour water over tea leaves that look like small boats. Steam climbs. The mug warms your fingers and something in your chest unwinds a fraction. You take your first sip and watch fog thread the harbor streets, pulling gray ribbons through alleys and past the museum stairs. Your phone buzzes. Mara Kean has sent a photo, an old Tide calendar she cataloged late last night. Look at this handwriting, her text reads. Like a patient storm. She's the archivist at the Maritime Museum, a friend made of accuracy and laughter, 2 of the sturdier materials. You send back a heart and a lie that says, see you by 9, because you will, because you always do. The note in your pocket crinkles when you breathe. You keep rereading it even though you know the 7 words by heart. The testing is ending, not your calling. You found it yesterday in the broom closet of all places, tucked inside an empty box of mop heads. You thought it was a prank until you saw your name written on the other side, spelled correctly, including the accent mark you abandoned after college because nobody had the patience for it. The first bus rolls past your window, a long sigh with headlights. It heads toward the Lighthouse Road and you imagine its driver, coffee thermos kissing knuckles, telling himself the same joke he tells himself every route. Routine is a kind of prayer. You have learned that. Some mornings, the reliable things keep your mind from inventing catastrophes out of quiet. You place the mug in the sink, still warm, and pull your coat from the hook. It smells like wool and an old rain that ended well. The door complains the way it always does. You palm the key and feel the red string tied to it, a thin bracelet Elias Truong wrapped there when the cleaning supply orders went missing for the 3rd time. A knot keeps a mind from fraying, he said, like it was the kind of proverb you inherit. You leave the building and step into the hour that still belongs to gentle people and bread bakers. At the intersection, fog writes its cursive across the streetlights. A chalk arrow appears on the sidewalk you swear was clean last night. You bend to read the loopy handwriting beside it. Sit. Breathe. You look up. There's a dry bench under the awning of the closed florist shop. A miracle of angle and wind. You obey. You set your bag beside you, place your palms face down on your knees, and realize, astonished, that obey is the right word. Your mind does what minds do when given permission. It catalogs, it confesses, it tries to bargain. But when your lungs lengthen and your shoulders forget their old shape, you feel a quiet you hadn't noticed was missing. The chalk arrow points toward the harbor, as if even chalk has a liturgy. You walk the last 2 blocks with a pace that doesn't argue with itself. At the museum steps, you pause, watching fog lift its hem from the water. The bell tower holds its breath. On the far breakwater, a figure the size of a comma turns and waves. You wave back because you are polite, because you like commas. After all, waving at strangers has never broken a single bone in your body. Mara opens the side door with the authority of a librarian in an adventure novel. "You're early," she says, eyes bright, scarf brighter. "I am proud and suspicious." "Chalk told me to breathe," you reply, which is exactly the sort of thing you can say to Mara without losing social capital. "Chalk is wise," she says. "Also, the lens." "The lens?" She holds up her phone. A grainy video shows the lighthouse lens turning once in the blue hour, a single slow revolution like a thoughtful nod. Anton swears he didn't touch it, said it was remembering. She does the quote fingers. "I love that man. He's 80% beard." You smile properly, the way smiling should be done, with both sides of the face. "Maybe it was saying hello." Mara laughs. "Maybe to you." You pass the ticket counter where school groups leave their gum and promises. In the back room, the Tide calendars are stacked like thin bones. You run your fingers over penciled numbers, smudged by years and handling. The past holds on in graphite, patient, undecorated. You find the one from your own first summer here and read the date you almost left. You don't know what to do with the tenderness that rises, so you do nothing. That, you decide, is also obedience. "Coffee?" Mara asks, already pouring. "Tea this morning." Rebellious. Iconic. The radio in the office croaks awake. Weather. A front moving in from the north, polite but firm. The voice reminds boat owners about their lines, as if responsibility is a kind of kindness. You touch the note in your pocket again, the 7 words suddenly heavier. "By the way," Mara says, lowering her voice for no apparent reason, "Anton left a box for you, said you'd know what it means." It's a shoebox, the faded kind with an oval cutout. Inside, a small brass key rests on velvet the color of old plums. No tag, no letter, just the weight of a possibility. "Do you know?" "No," she says. Which makes it more fun. You tuck the box under your arm and promise your face not to perform a reaction that would let the whole world in. At lunch, you go out for groceries because you forget what cooking is when you're tired. In the health aisle, you run into Dr. Celine Hart, the kind of physician who remembers the names of your cousins and asks about your laundry because she knows that folded socks are spiritual warfare. She picks up oats and smiles at you. "I saw you walking yesterday," she says. Your shoulders looked lighter. "Objects may be closer than they appear," you offer, which is not an answer, but it is true. "Keep going," she says, "and keep water near your bed. Oh, and if you're still taking that multivitamin, check whether it already includes vitamin B3. Vitamin B3, you repeat, deciding you like the long way a word wears its own clothes. She grins. "Look at you saying it properly. Proud of you." You leave with bread you don't need because it feels like an apology you want to make to yourself. At the register, you put down a few coins for the next person because you are becoming sneaky with kindness. On the way back, a busker sings at the corner. He's new, or maybe you never noticed him because you were busy inventing catastrophes out of quiet. His song is not about you, and yet, "Do not hurry past your healing," he sings, a line so clean it rinses your ears. You consider paying him with all your bread and a bicycle, but settle on gratitude and $2, which he receives like you handed him the moon's spare change. The afternoon slides into the kind of gray that cleans everything. You inventory exhibit cards, relabel a shelf, tell a child the bell was cast in 1891 and rang through 2 wars and a wedding. She asks, which was the loudest? And you say, the wedding, because truth deserves to be precise. At 4, you open the shoebox again. The key is simple, handsome, and uninterested in drama. If doors had hearts, you think, this would be the sort of key they'd trust. You don't know what it opens, and for the first time in a long time, not knowing does not insult you. You walk home slowly on purpose. Rain begins, not a threat, a ceremony. The chalk has blurred, but the instruction remains. Sit, breathe. You do, but this time on your own steps, hands on wood that remembers every heel that's ever tapped it. Across the street, Father Anton locks the bell tower and waves. You wave back, 2 people who trust simple motions to say complicated things. When night comes, the town draws its curtains, but not all the way. Lumenhaven likes to keep an honest slit of light. You set the key on your table, next to the torn letter you didn't write. Your phone buzzes, unknown number. You answer, expecting a survey or a wrong number. Instead, a voice you do not recognize says, you will recognize restoration by its quiet certainty. Who is this? You ask, but the line clicks and calls you foolish for asking a question that was, perhaps, supposed to be a gift. You laugh because what else do you do when the air decides to keep its sense of humor? Okay, you say to the room, message received. You know better than to trust a sentence just because it arrives. You also know better than to ignore it because it arrives kindly. You move like you do when carrying a glass of water filled too high, careful but not afraid. You wash your cup, wipe the counter, write on a small card the single line you want to remember. Peace, not pressure, will be my compass. In bed, you wait for the old companion's worry, rehearsal, critique, but they must be busy. A better offer came up. You close your eyes and dream a dream big enough to let someone else in. Someone ties a red string to a door frame and says, there, now you won't forget where you're going. When you wake, before the gulls file their complaints, the radio is already on, not static. The morning voice, warm as toast. Harbor advisory lifted earlier than expected. All vessels cleared. Carry on. Carry on, you repeat, soft like a vow. Outside, fog packs its suitcase. Somewhere, a man with a beard that is 80% of him agrees to tell the same story he has told for years because stories, unlike people, do not grow tired of being true. You pour water for tea and place the brass key in your pocket without asking for its permission. You do not need to know the door to trust the key. This, you decide, is a holy kind of practical. You step into the morning like it asked you for a dance. Theodore held the brass key all morning. Its weight became a metronome for his thoughts' tick of possibility, talk of patience. The museum air carried salt and old varnish. The sea never truly stayed outside. Every time the bell tower creaked above, it sounded like the world clearing its throat before speaking. At noon, Mara found him staring at the shoebox again. Still waiting for it to whisper its secrets, she teased. Maybe it already did, he said. I'm just not fluent yet. She laughed softly. Translation usually takes coffee. They shared a thermos by the window overlooking the pier. Through fog, the lighthouse was a ghost that remembered its own name. Children chased gulls below. Each laugh felt like punctuation in a sentence heaven kept rewriting. Mara nodded toward the key. You'll try it somewhere, won't you? When the door finds me, Theodore said, surprising himself with the certainty in his voice. It was something Father Anton once told him. Sometimes you don't look for doors, you keep walking, and the one meant for you calls your name. Later that day, Father Anton himself appeared, wrapped in his coat of unbothered wool. His beard really was 80% of him, as Mara liked to say. He looked at the key, then at Theodore. "Ah," he murmured, as if recognizing an old hymn. "You found what was never lost. Do you know what it opens?" Theodore asked. Anton shrugged, eyes kind. "A heart, perhaps, or a storeroom. Some things overlap." He motioned toward the bell tower. "Would you help me oil the gears tonight? The storm might return." It wasn't really a request. It was an invitation disguised as maintenance. That evening, the town folded itself into the wind. Theodore climbed the narrow steps behind Anton, the smell of iron and salt mixing with candle wax. Lantern light painted moving halos on the walls. The gears glistened with age and duty. Anton hummed as he worked. "This bell has heard everything," he said. "Prayers, confessions, even proposals shouted through rain. But its favorite sound is silence." Theodore handed him the oil can. "Why silence?" "Because only then does it ring true." The gears turned once, twice the sound low and alive. When they finished, Anton handed the brass key back to Theodore. "Keep it near. Sometimes the lock arrives days later." As they descended, thunder rolled across the bay. A flash illuminated the harbor, and for a moment, Theodore saw the lighthouse beam flicker again, a pulse through fog like a heartbeat remembered. He didn't mention it. Some miracle prefer privacy. Outside, rain baptized the street. Theodore walked home without an umbrella, tasting metal on the wind. At his door, he noticed a new chalk arrow, faint but deliberate, pointing upward toward his apartment. Beside it, another note taped to the railing. "Peace is the password." He smiled, unlocked the door, and whispered the word before entering, just in case the air was listening. Morning sunlight found every surface except the one Theodore wanted it to reach the desk where he'd left unfinished letters and that brass key. He sat down with a sigh that felt older than his age. The note from the night before still waited. "Peace is the password." He turned it over, blank. Yet the handwriting, calm and deliberate, echoed the first broom closet message. Whoever was writing these had steady hands and a purpose. Mara knocked precisely 3 times before entering, a ritual they invented to keep surprises polite. "I brought muffins," she declared, "because I'm a responsible adult and sugar solves mysteries." Theodore smiled. "I'll note that in the archives." They ate in companionable silence. Between bites, Mara produced a folded paper. "Council wants to open the north wing again, the one sealed after the flood. They asked if you'd help inventory what's left." The north wing. He hadn't stepped there in years. It was where volunteers once sorted donation boxes, where old journals swelled with damp air and promises. "I'll do it," he said, though a quiet unease stirred beneath the agreement. When they unlocked the wing that afternoon, the smell of paper and seaweed greeted them like a memory. Dust motes floated in lazy choreography. On the far table, Theodore noticed something that shouldn't be there. A small stack of envelopes wrapped in red string. Each bore no name, only a number. 1, 2, 3. He opened the first. Inside, a single line handwritten. "You will recognize restoration by its quiet certainty." His breath caught. The exact sentence from the anonymous phone call. He opened the second. "Delay is not denial, it is design." The third was empty, except for a faint pressed symbol, a bell drawn in graphite. Mara watched his expression shift. "Old donation letters?" "Something like that," he said. He didn't tell her. Not yet. The words felt sacred, not secret, but fragile like moths that crumble if touched too soon. That night, back home, thunder returned with less anger, more rhythm. He laid the envelopes beside the brass key. Patterns began to whisper. Key, bell, chalk, note. Every object carried its own sermon. As he drifted to sleep, the radio clicked on by itself. A woman's voice, calm, slightly distant, recited coordinates. 43 north, 72 west. Then static again. Theodore sat up, heart steady but curious. He looked them up the next morning. They pointed to an unmarked stretch of coastline outside Lumenhaven, where the old pier collapsed years ago. Coincidence, perhaps, or invitation. The path to the old pier was half forgotten, stitched with weeds and stubborn daisies. The sea had taken part of it, but the remaining boards still whispered underfoot. Theodore carried a thermos of tea, a notebook, and the brass key. Always the key. The air smelled of kelp and iron. Gulls traced slow circles overhead, complaining in verse. He reached the coordinates just as the tide began to rise. Nothing obvious waited there. No message in a bottle, no carved initials. Only a half-buried crate wedged between rocks. He pried it open. Inside, a rusted compass, a sealed envelope, and a photograph of the lighthouse taken decades ago. Across the bottom, someone had written, "Begin here again." The envelope contained a short letter. "Theodore, every calling repeats until answered. This time follow the sound, not the sight. The bell knows its keeper." E. He recognized the initial. Elias Truong, the janitor who left folded notes with single sentences of courage. But Elias had moved away months ago, no one knew where. Theodore closed the letter carefully. The compass needle trembled, then pointed inland, not seaward. Back in town, he stopped by the bell tower. Father Anton was sanding a plank, humming. "You look like a man who heard something worth obeying," Anton said. "Maybe," Theodore replied, showing him the compass and letter. Anton read without surprise. "Elias was my apprentice once. Quiet boy, full of listening. He said he'd leave messages behind where the wind wouldn't erase them. Do you think this was meant for me?" Anton considered. "If you found it, then yes." He took the compass, tapped it gently, and handed it back. "Follow where it points tomorrow morning. Not tonight. Rest first. Revelation is useless without sleep." Theodore laughed softly. "You sound like Dr. Celine. She's wise. Keeps people alive longer so they can finish their sentences." That night, Theodore obeyed. He brewed tea, wrote in his notebook, and listed every small mercy of the day: the fog thinning, the child who waved at him, the plank Anton smoothed without splinters. Gratitude, he realized, was a form of navigation too. When he woke before dawn, the compass needle pulsed toward the east ridge. He packed water, bread, and the old tide calendar Mara had given him, just in case maps needed friends. The ridge trail wound through pine and fog. Birds began their council meetings in the canopy. Near the top, he found an abandoned lookout cabin. The door resisted until he remembered the brass key. It fit. It turned. Inside lay another note pinned to a beam. "You're not lost. You're just being read slowly." He smiled, half laughing, half crying. Whoever orchestrated this, God, wind, or an overly poetic janitor, knew exactly how to speak his language. He sat by the window for hours, watching light crawl down the trees, realizing that maybe restoration didn't arrive in trumpets but in breadcrumbs. By the time Theodore descended from the ridge, noon had polished the harbor silver. He stopped at the bakery, partly hunger, partly habit. The owner, Mrs. Lynn, handed him an extra roll without explanation. "For the road you didn't know you'd travel," she said, as if reading from someone else's script. At the museum, Mara was labeling artifacts with the focus of a surgeon. "You look taller," she observed. "Elevation does that," he joked, setting the compass on her desk. "What's this?" A story still being written. She leaned closer, fascination replacing humor. "Do you ever feel like the town itself is aware?" He hesitated. Sometimes it feels like it's praying for us." Mara smiled. "Then let's not disappoint it." That evening, Theodore walked along the shoreline path. The tide spoke in syllables only patience could translate. He found another chalk mark near the benches, this time a circle instead of an arrow, enclosing the word "stay." Saturday. Boats returned one by one, their lanterns blinking like polite constellations. Somewhere behind him, the bell tower began to toll slowly, deliberately, measuredly. Each strike felt less like a warning, more like a heartbeat. He closed his eyes and whispered the old note aloud. "The testing is ending, not your calling." The words no longer sounded mysterious, they sounded fulfilled. As night deepened, a child's voice drifted from the pier. The same little one he'd seen before, maybe 10 years old, barefoot and brave. "Did you find your door, mister?" she asked. "I think the door found me." She nodded, serious. "Then don't leave it open too long. Things fly away." Before he could reply, she was gone, like part of the mist. Theodore laughed quietly to himself. The laughter felt lighter, unburdened. He realized that peace wasn't a finish line, but a rhythm, something he could keep even while walking. He headed home under a sky rinsed clean. Passing the bell tower, he glanced up. A faint glimmer pulsed behind the shutters, a suggestion of a lens turning once again. He whispered, "Message received," and meant it. That night, his dreams were calm. He saw the lighthouse fully lit, not as a ghost, but as guidance. In the dream, the voice said only one thing: "Begin again, but gentler this time." Morning came with a sound that was not quite rain, not quite wind, a soft murmuring that made the curtains breathe. Theodore woke before his alarm, the brass key still on the nightstand, gleaming like something alive. He couldn't shake the dream from the night before the lighthouse turning. The words, "Begin again, but gentler this time." The echo stayed in his chest, quieter but insistent, like a song you never meant to memorize. After tea in silence, he walked toward the museum. The fog had returned, softening edges, making even power lines look like brushstrokes. As he passed the bell tower, Father Anton was sweeping the steps with unnecessary care. "Storm cleared early," Theodore said. Anton nodded without looking up. "Storms always end, but some leave music behind." Inside the museum, Mara was bent over the inventory ledger. "You're here early," she said without lifting her head. "Habit," Theodore answered, then hesitated. "Do you believe in recurrences?" She finally looked up. "Like history repeating?" "No," he said, searching for the right words. "More like invitations repeating until you answer." Mara thought about that for a moment, then smiled. Maybe life is polite enough to knock more than once. The north wing waited silent, half-shadowed. Dust hung in the beams of light like small planets. Theodore unlocked the door and stepped inside. Every sound was amplified, his shoes on concrete, paper rustling, his own breath. At the far wall, a narrow wooden door stood alone, one he didn't remember from before. It had no handle, no hinges visible, only a faint outline of a frame. In the middle, carved in clean letters, "You already have the key." He touched the brass key in his pocket. For a moment he thought he felt a pulse, almost like the heartbeat of an idea. Mara joined him. "That door wasn't here last year," she whispered. "Or maybe we never saw it," Theodore replied. They examined the frame. No visible lock, no hinges. The surface felt smooth, newly varnished, and yet dust had settled thickly around it, as though it had always been there. They tried pressing, knocking, even shining a flashlight into the cracks. Nothing. "Strange," Mara murmured. "Maybe it's decorative. Maybe it's patient," Theodore said softly. When they left the room, the door reflected the light in a way that made it seem to exhale. Theodore looked back once before closing the north wing. The words carved there seemed to glow. "You already have the key." That evening he dreamed again of the lighthouse, but this time it was open, its staircase gleaming. Each step he climbed whispered a word: "Stay, listen, breathe." At the top stood the door with no handle. He woke just before touching it. The next day, Mara delivered a small parcel wrapped in brown paper. "Mail for you," she said. Came with no return address. "Smells like nostalgia." Theodore opened it carefully. Inside lay an old journal, his journal, the one he lost years ago when a storm flooded his apartment. The cover was water-stained, the pages wrinkled, but his handwriting survived like a stubborn memory. Tucked between the pages was a folded sheet dated January 12, 6 years ago. "If I ever forget what peace feels like, remind me that rest is not laziness, that silence is not absence, that waiting is not punishment." He read the words twice, then looked out the window at the harbor. Fog drifted over the water like a second skin. The past was talking again, not accusing, just remembering. Mara peeked over his shoulder. "Old you had good handwriting. Old me had more certainty," he said quietly. She shook her head. "No, old you had fewer questions. There's a difference." Later, while reorganizing the museum storage, Theodore found a locked drawer inside an antique desk. The brass key always near fit perfectly. Inside was a sealed envelope labeled, "For when you start to believe again." He sat down, pulse steady but quick. The paper was thin, fragile, and when he opened it, the letter inside carried the scent of cedar and rain. "Theodore, you keep trying to fix what was only meant to be forgiven. Some bridges burn because the season changed, not because you failed to cross them. The lesson is not to repair, it is to release. You will know it's working when peace no longer feels like waiting." The handwriting wasn't his, it wasn't Mara's. It was similar to the earlier notes, calm, deliberate, and confident. He reread it until the ink blurred. For the first time in months, tears came without warning, not of despair or recognition. He'd spent so long measuring progress by noise that he'd forgotten the holiness of quiet recovery. That night, he didn't turn on the radio. He simply sat by the window, watching fog roll in, whispering the words from the letter. Peace no longer feels like waiting. For the first time, he believed it. The next morning, the town was alive. A festival had begun, an impromptu gathering celebrating the reopening of the fisherman's market. Children ran between stalls, violins hummed somewhere near the bakery. Mara waved him over from a bench. "Come hear this," she said. "The harbor choir is performing. They do this once a year, songs from the sea." Theodore sat, half smiling. The choir began with an old sailor's hymn, voices rising and falling like the tide itself. Then, in the middle of the song, a single line caught his attention. "Do not hurry past your healing." His pulse stilled. That was the same line the street busker had sung weeks ago, the exact phrasing, the same melody. He looked around. None of the singers seemed to notice anything unusual. Mara saw his expression. "You okay?" He nodded. "Just déjà vu." When the song ended, applause rippled across the pier. The choir bowed. Then the conductor, a man with silver hair, approached Theodore with a gentle smile. "You're Theodore, yes? How do you?" "Elias spoke of you," the man said. "He taught me that song years ago." Theodore felt his breath catch. "Elias, you knew him?" "Knew," the man corrected softly. "He left town last winter, said his work was finished. He asked me to sing that line every year for whoever needed it." Theodore didn't answer. The harbor breeze filled the silence for him. Later, as the crowd dispersed, he walked along the shoreline, replaying the melody in his mind. The line repeated until it became a prayer. "Do not hurry past your healing. Do not hurry past your healing." The tide had risen higher than usual. On the sand, someone had written in seashells, "Keep the quiet, it knows the way." He stayed there until sunset, letting the orange light thread through his thoughts. It felt as if every sound in Lumenhaven carried one message: now patience. When night came, the lighthouse flared once more. Not bright enough to guide ships, just enough to remind him that some lights shine only for the watchers on land. Theodore's new calm didn't go unnoticed. Some colleagues found it unnerving. When he declined to take on an extra project, citing rest and boundaries, the room fell silent like he'd uttered a curse. "Are you all right?" one asked, half concerned, half offended. "I'm learning to be," he said simply. Whispers followed him that week, polite confusion from people still loyal to exhaustion. Even Mara tilted her head once. "You're different lately, softer, but also stronger." "Maybe peace is contagious," he said. At home, however, the quiet deepened into testing. The door with no handle began to appear in his dreams more frequently, sometimes in strange places at the end of a corridor, reflected in puddles, even in the surface of his tea. Always the same carving: "You already have the key." One night, he woke suddenly to find the brass key glowing faintly on his nightstand, a trick of moonlight maybe, or something else. He held it up, and the glow faded. But when he placed it against the notebook, the outline of the mysterious door seemed to appear on the page, drawn in faint white lines. He didn't understand it. He only knew that something was asking him to keep going. At the museum, they began restoring old blueprints of Lumenhaven city maps, structural sketches. Theodore noticed something odd: a sealed corridor beneath the bell tower, labeled Foundry Access, closed since 1912. "Foundry?" he asked Father Anton. The old man nodded. "Old maintenance tunnel. Flooded decades ago. Why?" Theodore hesitated, just curious. That night, curiosity won. He returned with a lantern and descended the narrow staircase behind the tower's main hall. The air was damp, metallic, breathing softly through unseen cracks. At the end of the passage, a wooden barrier blocked the way. On it, carved by hand, was the same phrase: "You already have the key." His pulse quickened. He pressed the brass key against the center plank. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then a sound, low and tender, like a sigh of hinges remembering motion. The board loosened slightly. He didn't force it. He only whispered, "Message received," and turned back, the echo following him up the stairs. The next morning, the town bell rang on its own at sunrise. No one pulled the rope. The bell's unsummoned toll drew a crowd. People gathered at the square, murmuring, pointing to the tower. Father Anton examined the mechanism and found nothing wrong. "Perhaps the wind prayed loudly," he said, smiling faintly. Mara, however, was pale. "That's never happened before," she whispered to Theodore. "Not in my lifetime." He said nothing. Inside, something uncoiled, not fear but awe. The door below, the key, the timing, it all felt orchestrated by hands invisible but kind. Days passed. Lumenhaven entered its soft autumn. Misty mornings, saffron leaves, sea wind that smelled of stories. Theodore spent evenings writing again, filling pages with reflections rather than reports. He wrote, "Every delay carried meaning. Every silence was a sentence waiting for breath. I mistook stillness for neglect, but it was preparation all along." One evening, he met Dr. Celine Hart at the grocery again. She smiled knowingly. "You look well, Theodore. Rest suits you." "I've been learning from fog," he said. "Fog is honest," she replied. "It never pretends to be something else, and it moves on when the sun arrives." They laughed quietly in the aisle. Before leaving, she touched his arm. "You're not the same man who came to me last winter. Keep the small rituals, tea, music, and long walks. And remember what I told you about vitamin B3. He grinned. Yes, doctor. I even pronounce it correctly now. That night, he stood on the pier with Mara, watching the water catch the last light of day. Do you think the lighthouse will ever fully shine again? She asked. It already does, he said. Just not in the way we expect. The waves clapped against the stones. The bell tower hummed with distant wind. And somewhere beyond the visible horizon, the next note of his story waited not loudly, but patiently. He closed his eyes, breathed deeply, and smiled into the dark. Peace, not pressure, will be my compass. The day began with rare color. After so many gray dawns, a blue that didn't shout but shimmered quietly on the bay. Theodore took it as an omen of permission. Mara met him at the museum door, holding 2 coffees and an uncharacteristic grin. Council signed off on the renovation, she said. We can finally open the north wing. Theodore blinked. Already? I thought that would take months. They said the paperwork was mysteriously expedited. Some clerk found the missing signatures last night. She handed him a folder. Inside, the approval stamp gleamed red and final. They entered the north wing together. The door with no handle stood waiting, the carved words slightly brighter than before. The air smelled of dust, paint, and something sweeter like cedar, warmed by light. Workers cleared debris. Brushes whispered against the walls. Theodore moved from shelf to shelf, cataloging, sorting. When he reached the door, he placed his palm flat upon it. Still locked? Mara asked. Yes, he said, but it feels awake. At noon, everyone broke for lunch. Theodore stayed. Something in him insisted he wait alone. He took the brass key from his pocket and pressed it gently against the wood. This time, the wood trembled under his hand, and a faint click whispered through the silence. He stepped back. A thin line of light appeared where no seam had been. He called softly, If you're meant to open, open kindly. The door eased inward soundlessly, gracefully revealing a small chamber lined with shelves. Inside were sealed jars of sea glass, stacks of weathered notebooks, and a single lantern still burning, though no one had lit it. Mara returned, froze in the doorway. What on earth? On heaven, maybe, Theodore said, half smiling. Among the notebooks lay one labeled Lumenhaven Restoration Log. Its first entry read, If you're reading this, the city has begun to remember itself. Keep the light gentle. Too much brightness blinds. Below, a signature. Elias Throng. Mara exhaled. He was documenting everything? Not everything, Theodore said, turning the pages. Just miracles that behaved like paperwork. That evening they locked the chamber again, this time leaving the door slightly ajar as if the invitation itself needed ventilation. Word of the discovery spread. The council wanted the notebooks displayed. Tourists trickled in, curious. Theodore felt protective that the pages weren't exhibits, they were testimonies. Mara noticed his tension. You can't guard every miracle, she said. I'm not guarding, he replied. I'm translating. But the crowd noise made translation difficult. People took photos, speculated, argued whether it was marketing or mystery. Theodore withdrew to the bell tower for quiet. Father Anton found him there, sanding the railing. You look like a man trying to pour the ocean back into a bottle, he said. I wanted to keep it pure. Purity without participation becomes pride, Anton said gently. Let them see. Light multiplies when shared. Theodore sighed. It's hard to let go. Anton smiled. That's why it's holy. That night, Theodore wrote a short message on a scrap of paper and slid it under the museum door before leaving. Please treat the notebooks with silence between sentences. The next morning, he found a reply pinned to the door. Silence granted. We will display them with reverence. Council Secretary Marin Vu. He smiled. Lumenhaven was learning too. Later he met Dr. Celine Hart for tea. She spoke about balance, about how people mistake exhaustion for achievement. Peace is not permission to stop caring, she said. It's the strength to keep caring wisely. Theodore nodded. You sound like Father Anton. Good, she laughed. He fixes wood, I fix people, same materials. Before leaving, she added, keep your morning walks, your tea, your vitamins, especially your vitamin B3. He promised he would, enjoying the deliberate slowness of the words. That evening, the chalk returned 3 symbols on the pavement outside his home. A circle, an arrow, a heart. Beneath them, stay open. He whispered back, I'm trying. Rain came heavy, then left as if embarrassed by its own noise. The museum smelled of wet wood. Mara handed Theodore a new delivery, another envelope without an address. Inside was a half-written letter, ink smudged mid-sentence. Dear Theodore, if you're reading this, it means I never learned how to... The rest dissolved in water stains. At the bottom, one word remained legible, forgive. He felt an old ache return the friend he'd lost years ago, the apology never spoken. Guilt has a way of finding new handwriting. Mara saw his expression and touched his shoulder. Some letters finish themselves when we stop editing. That night, Theodore wrote his own reply on fresh paper. Dear whoever waited for this, I forgive you. I also forgive the version of me that kept replaying what went wrong. If peace reaches you before this letter does, keep it. He placed the note inside a jar of sea glass from Elias's chamber and set it on the windowsill. The jar glowed faintly in moonlight, as if someone elsewhere had received it. He slept deeply, the kind of sleep that doesn't chase itself in circles. Weeks passed. The museum thrived. The town seemed lighter. Yet Theodore felt a new restlessness, not discontent, but momentum. Each morning, he woke before dawn, sensing that something was about to shift. One fog-thick dawn, the bell rang once a single tone, low and deliberate. He climbed the tower and found Father Anton waiting with 2 mugs of coffee. The bell wanted company, Anton said. They stood in silence until the sun broke through. Anton spoke first. Do you remember when the lens turned by itself? Yes. It turned again last night. Ends for... Theodore smiled. Then it's keeping rhythm with us. Anton nodded. Perhaps, but rhythm leads somewhere. He handed Theodore a small wooden box. Inside lay a new key, silver, finely engraved. On its handle, a pattern of waves. This isn't mine, Theodore said. It is now. Elias left it here years ago. Said to give it to whoever would someday open the last door. The last door? Anton pointed toward the lighthouse on the horizon. That one. Theodore felt his pulse steady. When peace tells you to move, Anton replied. That night, Theodore packed lightly notebook, a lantern, a thermos, and both keys. He didn't know why, only that waiting had become its own obedience. He wrote a single line before leaving his apartment. I am ready for gentle light. Dawn stretched thin across the water, turning fog into silk. Theodore walked the coastal path with measured breath. Each step felt rehearsed by the tide. The lighthouse loomed ahead, a sentinel asleep. Rust streaked its base. Windows shuddered. The sea hissed against stone. He reached the door, iron-bound, ancient. The silver key slid in easily, turning with a sigh older than memory. Inside, the spiral stair wound upward through shadows. Dust motes rose like incense. Halfway up, he paused to catch his breath and heard singing. A low hum, wordless, echoing off the stone. Not human, not haunting, harmonious. He climbed faster. At the top, the great lens stood still, coated in dust. The hum deepened as he approached, until it became recognizable, the same tone as the town bell. He placed the brass key at the lens's base. A pulse of light burst outward, not blinding but tender, bathing the room in gold. Through the glass, he saw Lumenhaven below, roofs shining, harbor awake, people pausing mid-stride to look toward the tower. For a full minute, every clock in town stopped ticking, as if time bowed in reverence. Then the light softened, the hum quieted. Theodore breathed, eyes wet. A note rested on the railing, fresh, ink still glistening. "Well done. The message continues in you." He smiled. "Message received," he whispered. He stayed until sunset, writing in his notebook. "I thought my task was to listen, but it was to echo." "Peace spoke," I answered. "That is all." When he descended, the air outside shimmered with warmth. People gathered on the beach, pointing at the now glowing lens. Someone began to sing the harbor hymn again. Children laughed. The fog applauded by rolling back to sea. Mara found him at the base of the path. "You did it," she said softly. "We did," Theodore replied. "The whole town did. We just remembered together." She looked up at the light. "What now?" He smiled. "Now, we carry it without burning out." They walked home in silence, the bell chiming once more behind them, sealing the day like punctuation. That night before sleep, Theodore opened the window. Moonlight washed the room. On his desk lay both keys, side by side. The brass one is dull with use, the silver one is still shining. He whispered, "Thank you." And somewhere in the harbor, the water answered with a gentle clap. Theodore woke to birds arguing over the roof gutter, small, ordinary music after extraordinary light. For a moment, he wondered if the previous night had been a dream. But when he drew the curtains, the proof gleamed across the bay. The lighthouse lens still shimmered faint gold, steady as a heartbeat. Down in the street, neighbors spoke in soft astonishment. Children pointed. Even the vendors at the market lowered their voices as though entering a cathedral. Mara arrived at his door without knocking, holding 2 paper cups. "I couldn't stay home," she said. "The whole town's glowing." "It feels different," Theodore said, accepting the coffee. "Not louder, just truer." They walked to the pier together. Everywhere people behaved as if courtesy had suddenly become fashionable. A fisherman helped an elderly woman carry nets. Teenagers laughed without cruelty. Peace, it turned out, was contagious when witnessed. Father Anton stood near the bell tower steps, hands clasped behind his back. "Light brings revelation," he told them, "but revelation brings responsibility. How will you carry this without turning it into a spectacle?" Theodore smiled. "Maybe by walking slowly." Anton chuckled. "Then begin now, slowly." That evening, Theodore returned to the lighthouse alone. The stairs still creaked, but no longer mournfully. At the top, he placed both keys on the railings, brass and silver side by side, and whispered, "Thank you for trusting me with quiet work." The light flickered once, like a nod. Within a week, envelopes began arriving all over Lumenhaven. No stamps, no handwriting, only typed lines folded neatly inside. Each bore a single sentence of encouragement. "You are not late. Begin again, gently. Peace is practical." The mayor received one tucked into a ledger. The baker found one inside a flour sack. Even the bus driver discovered a note on his dashboard. "Every route is holy when driven kindly." Mara laughed when she showed hers to Theodore. "They're multiplying like blessings." He examined the paper. "The font matches Elias's old typewriter," he said softly. "Maybe someone found it. Or maybe the town's doing what towns do," she replied, "repeating good news until it sticks." They decided to collect the letters for a small exhibition, not to expose mystery, but to preserve wonder. The display opened under the title, Messages in Plain Sight. Visitors left smiling, some left notes of their own. One afternoon, a teenager approached Theodore at the exhibit. "Sir," she said shyly, "I found a note that said, 'You already have the key. Does that mean anything?'" He met her gaze, smiled gently. "It means everything important will open when you stop forcing it." She nodded, as if relieved to hear what her heart already knew. That night, Theodore wrote in his journal, "When peace becomes ordinary, miracles no longer need to shout, they hum." Not everyone rejoiced. A few voices in town called the letters superstition. Some accused the museum of orchestrating publicity. Anonymous posts on local boards demanded proof. Theodore read the debates without anger. He understood. Light reveals dust before it comforts the eyes. Still, the tension unsettled Mara. "They're mocking what healed them," she said. "Maybe healing is too intimate," he answered. "People flinch when they're touched where it hurts." "No." To steady her, he suggested they host an open evening. No speeches, just music and quiet. They called it the listening hour. When the night came, more people arrived than expected. Father Anton rang the bell once at the start, then silence settled. No sermons, no explanations, only candlelight and the distant sound of waves. Halfway through, rain began to fall, tapping softly on the museum's glass roof. Theodore watched as even the skeptics relaxed their shoulders. D'outre Quirnoise, peace survivra. Afterward, someone asked if the event would repeat weekly. Mara looked at Theodore. He nodded. "Yes," he said, "as long as silence agrees to visit." Later that week, he found another note slipped under his apartment door. "Do not defend the light, simply keep it lit." He pinned it above his desk. Winter approached. The air tasted of salt and iron again. One evening, while closing the lighthouse gate, Theodore noticed footprints leading down the beach, one set, barefoot, ending at a weathered bench. On the bench rested a sealed envelope and, beside it, a familiar red string. He sat, heart steady but quick, and opened the letter. "Theodore, you carried the assignment faithfully. The lens turns on its own now. That means the message no longer needs a messenger. Still, one task remains. Teach others to listen without waiting for storms. I am near, but not visible. E." He tied the red string around his wrist and whispered into the wind, "Then teach me how to teach." The answer came as a simple thought, quiet and precise. "Live the way the note would sound if spoken aloud." He laughed softly. "That's impossible." Yet the more he walked home, the more he realized it wasn't. Every act of patience, every small kindness, every refusal to hurry, these were syllables of the same language. The next morning he began writing brief reflections for the museum notice board, one paragraph a day, titled Harbor Notes. People read them while waiting for buses, while buying bread. Each note ended the same way. "Carry on, gently." The series spread further than he expected. Nearby towns requested copies. A local paper reprinted them under the headline, Messages Without Faces. Theodore smiled at the irony. Spring returned with confident sunlight. The lighthouse no longer needed tending. It turned faithfully at dusk, as if powered by gratitude itself. Lumenhaven changed quietly. Fewer quarrels in markets, more laughter from balconies. The listening hour became a weekly rhythm of candles, music, and pauses. Even the critics attended now, because silence had a way of winning arguments no one wanted to keep. Mara leaned against the museum railing one evening, watching the crowd disperse. "Do you ever miss the mystery?" she asked. "The waiting, the clues, the puzzles?" Theodore considered. Mystery didn't leave, he said. It just moved inside us. He handed her a small envelope. Inside was a note in his handwriting. When peace becomes habit, heaven feels near. She smiled. You should publish these. They already are, he said, pointing toward the sky where the lighthouse beam traced its patient circle. Every night edition. Later, alone, Theodore walked to the pier where the child had once spoken to him. A single seashell lay on the bench, shaped like a heart. He placed it in his palm and whispered, "Message received." Again. A soft breeze rose, carrying the faint toll of the bell across the water. For the first time, he didn't turn to look. He simply listened, and knew that listening itself was the message continuing. He went home, poured tea, and wrote the final line of his journal. Peace that stays is not a miracle. It's maturity. Then he closed the notebook, blew out the candle, and let darkness be darkness, unthreatening, full of stars. The museum's north wing lights glowed long after closing time. Theodore stayed to straighten the display, but mostly to listen. The silence had changed. It no longer echoed, it breathed. A knock interrupted his reverie. A young man stood at the door, rain on his shoulders and nervousness in his posture. "I read your harbor notes," he said. "I'm not from here, but..." I felt pulled. "Come in," Theodore said. The boy introduced himself as Min, a carpenter's apprentice from a town upriver. He'd been restless for months, unable to sleep, hearing in his dreams a bell he'd never seen. Theodore poured him tea. "Maybe you were being invited, not haunted." They talked until the kettle cooled. Min admitted he wanted to learn not theology, not history, just how to stay calm when the world refused to cooperate. Theodore smiled. "Then you'll fit right in. Lumenhaven's specialty is unfinished peace." He showed him the chamber behind the handleless door. Min touched the shelves with reverence. "It feels alive." "It is," Theodore said. "Everything honest breathes." That night, before locking up, he wrote a line on the notice board. To teach is to keep the flame at child height. When he left, he saw Min still outside, sketching the lighthouse in the rain. Days passed. The apprentice kept returning. He helped repair windows, sweep floors, and polish brass plaques. But Theodore noticed his impatience. "When will I know I've changed?" Min asked. "When you stop counting," Theodore replied. He led the boy to the pier where fog folded the world into privacy. "Listen," he said. "The wind teaches by repetition. It moves the same water every day, yet the sea never complains." They sat while gulls drew commas in the sky. Min frowned. "Sometimes I want loud miracles." So did I, Theodore said, until I realized the quiet ones last longer. Back at the museum, they found a new envelope taped to the door. Inside, 2 students make 1 teacher. E. Min read it aloud, puzzled. Theodore laughed. "Then maybe I'm the one learning now." That evening, they repaired a broken lantern together. The flame sputtered, then steadied. Min whispered, "It's small." "Exactly," Theodore said. "Small light, big job." The newfound calm in town stirred civic curiosity. The council invited Theodore to a meeting, half gratitude, half audit. In the hall, voices bounced off polished wood. A clerk asked, "Mr. Theodore, what exactly did you do to that lighthouse?" He smiled. "I listened to it until it remembered its purpose." They chuckled, unsure if it was philosophy or confession. The mayor leaned forward. "Can you ensure it keeps shining?" "No one ensures light," he said gently. "We just stop blocking it." For a moment, silence held authority. Then the mayor nodded slowly. "Fair." After the meeting, Father Anton met him outside. "Government meetings are good practice for prayer," he said. "Both require patience and humility." They laughed together, the old bell chiming above them. as if applauding restraint. That night, Theodore wrote, "Influence isn't louder, it's longer." Mid-spring brought a storm, the kind that tests foundations. Wind bullied the harbor, rain clawed at windows, electricity failed. Lumenhaven darkened except for one point, the lighthouse, still turning, still faithful. Theodore and Min climbed the path with lanterns, checking shutters and ropes. Waves crashed like angry drums. Inside the tower, the beam swung through sheets of rain, slicing the chaos into rhythm. Min shouted above the roar, "It shouldn't still work." "Exactly," Theodore grinned. "Faith rarely obeys forecasts." Hostess. Hours later, the storm subsided. They emerged soaked, laughing like survivors of a baptism. Down below, roofs were intact, boats still moored. Mara met them with towels and disbelief. "Nothing's broken," she said, "not even the glass roof." "Maybe the light covered for us," Theodore answered. He looked toward the sea where dawn pried open the horizon. "Storms don't destroy peace," he murmured. "They prove it." Summer ripened quietly. Gardens grew wild. Markets overflowed. The museum hosted travelers who came not for relics but for rest. They sat among the displays, breathing slower. Theodore and Min guided small circles of visitors through the north wing, teaching silence as if it were heritage. Mara curated the letters into a bound volume titled "Peace That Works When Practiced." At the book's launch, she read aloud, "We keep waiting for miracles shaped like fireworks. Yet peace is a candle that refuses to die out even when the windows open." Applause came softly, palms meeting like prayer. Later that night, Theodore walked alone to the lighthouse once more. He carried the 2 keys in his pocket, heavier with meaning than metal. He unlocked the door, climbed the spiral, and placed them on the sill. "Both done," he whispered. "Brass for beginnings, silver for stewardship." The lens turned once, bathing him in light warm enough to make memory sweat. He closed his eyes, felt the pulse beneath the beam, and knew the work was complete. In his journal he wrote, "The final miracle is ordinary life, done kindly." He left the notebook on the desk beside Elias's first message and walked out into a night so calm it almost hummed. Autumn's first chill pressed against the harbor windows. Leaves ferried themselves down Main Street like small letters addressed to no one. Theodore had begun teaching once a week in the museum's upper room, no syllabus, just chairs in a circle and questions allowed to stay unanswered. Min now led the opening moment. 1 minute of quiet before anyone spoke. "Stillness is attendance," he said once, and people nodded as if signing a contract with calm. Visitors arrived from other towns, curious about the Lumenhaven way. Theodore smiled at the phrase but corrected them gently. "There is no way," he said, "only willingness." After every session he returned to the pier to watch the tide erase footprints. It became his reminder that even lessons dissolve. What matters is what remains in the heart. One evening he found a new note pinned to the railing, typed, unsigned, unmistakably familiar. "Teachers graduate when their students begin to teach each other." He folded it into his coat pocket without surprise. The old cafe by the square had been closed for years, its windows clouded by dust and memory. One morning Mara announced, "The council finally funded its restoration. They want you to name it." Theodore declined. Names belong to beginnings, not endings. So they named it themselves. Harbor Table. When it opened, everyone came. Sailors, bakers, teachers, children, drifters. Conversation wove across wood polished by generosity. A wall inside bore a mural, the lighthouse, the bell tower, and beneath them one line from Theodore's journal. "Peace that stays is not a miracle, it's maturity." He felt shy seeing his handwriting there, but Mara whispered, "It's what we all needed to remember." At dusk, they served bread and tea. No speeches, just the murmur of forks and forgiveness. Theodore raised his cup. "To shared light," he said. The room answered softly, "To shared light." "I won." Outside, the lens turned on cue, spilling gold through the cafe windows. Every table glowed as if individually blessed. Seasons began to repeat themselves, which is how you know a story is nearing peace. Min announced he would travel north to help rebuild another harbor's signal tower. "They asked for advice," he said, eyes bright. Theodore hugged him, a quiet gesture, full of gratitude. "Remember," he said, "don't export the miracle, export the method listening." Mara, too, was changing. The council had offered her directorship of the new coastal archives. She hesitated. "Lumenhaven feels like a promise I shouldn't leave," she said. "Promises mature into invitations," Theodore replied. "Go." The night before their departures, they gathered by the lighthouse. Candles dotted the rocks like grounded stars. Father Anton, older and slower now, spoke last. "You've all become keepers of something larger than this town. Carry it, but don't cage it." Waves applauded. Fog bowed out. When dawn came, the apprentices left. The paths they took curved in opposite directions, but both toward sunrise. Theodore watched until they disappeared, then whispered, "Graduation looks suspiciously like goodbye." Winter returned the quiet kind, white-edged and forgiving. Theodore spent most days cataloging new donations, answering visitors, and ending small things. His hair silvered at the edges like the key he no longer carried. Both had served their time. One evening he found an empty envelope on his desk. He smiled at the prompt and began to write, not to anyone, but for everyone. "My dearest child, whichever day you find this, breathe. The world is not behind schedule, neither are you. If you can choose between being impressive and being kind, choose kind. The light that guided me still works. It just prefers quiet operators. Carry on gently." He signed nothing. He left the page inside the Lighthouse journal, between the first and last entries, a bridge of handwriting across time. Outside, snow began to fall sideways, wrapping the harbor in hush. The bell chimed once low, certain content. Years later, visitors still spoke of Lumenhaven as the town that listens. The lighthouse kept turning, the cafe kept feeding, the letters still appeared, sometimes in shop bags, sometimes in pockets. No one traced their origin anymore. They didn't need to. On an ordinary noon, sunlight spilled across the harbor so fiercely it looked like melted gold. A group of children played by the pier. One of them, a girl with paint on her fingers, looked up at the tower and asked, "Who turns the light now?" Her mother smiled. "No one, it remembers." Up in the tower room, dust floated like tiny witnesses around an old wooden desk. On it lay 2 keys and a seashell shaped like a heart. The window stood open. Wind moved through, lifting a single page from the journal, carrying it toward the light until it vanished in brightness. The last sentence read, "Peace, not pressure, will be my compass. Always." Outside, the bell answered with 3 slow chimes. Across the bay, the town kept living, selling, fixing, forgiving, beginning again. And somewhere in that rhythm, you could still hear I.T., the faintest whisper riding the wind. Message received. When I finished writing Theodore's journey, I realized it was never about miracles. It was about maintaining the quiet kind that keeps hope from rusting. Every symbol, the key, the door, the bell, was simply an echo of what we all carry. The ability to open, to answer, to ring true. If you felt peace somewhere between the sentences, that means the story worked exactly as it should. May you find your own Lumenhaven in the ordinary places. and may your light turn faithfully even when no one is watching. Thank you, my dear one, for staying until the end. If Theodore's message touched you, share this light with another soul. Leave a like, subscribe, and let peace travel farther than words can. Until next time, remember, peace, not pressure, will be your compass.